But I want to turn our attention to rugby, and in particular what's been going on in Australia with Israel Folau, who the latest we hear is he has 2 days to formally respond or face the sack after being served with a breach of notice by Rugby Australia over his highly controversial social media post. Jack Anderson is on the line, a lawyer in Australia, and has been following this quite closely. Good morning, Jack, or good evening where you are.
Yeah, hello to you all.
So we've been covering this story for the last week or so, and there's obviously been a huge amount of outrage and a big backlash towards Israel Folau, and it feels now we're entering into the more legal side of this. It's very straightforward. Look at it would be that he's made outrageous homophobic comments and that he should be fired, but it's not that simple, I guess.
Yeah, well, in some ways it probably is, because he's made these comments before. So what has happened is Rugby Australia, his employer, has said, don't do it again. But he has done it again. And so they had him on a warning, and now they said, you're facing serious consequences, you're going to lose your job. So in some ways it's that straightforward. But of course, it's not really in the whole context. Obviously, there is a sporting context. He's their best player by far, and it's a World Cup year. Maybe there's pressure from sponsors here from the other side. But also there's an interesting thing is he's now got 24 hours to reply to this code of conduct hearing. And we don't even know whether or not he will go for this hearing. But if he does, he'll probably argue two things. You know, first of all, he'll say straightforward kind of a procedural thing. Well, in a way, you've already made a decision. You've already tried to, more or less sack me. So what's this hearing about, And the second point is, if he does go to the hearing, which is interesting, is what will he argue? And he may well argue kind of this human rights, religious discrimination argument, saying, I hold these views sincerely. And there's no doubt that he does hold these views sincerely. And why am I being discriminated in the workplace because of this? So they're the two kind of key issues.
And Jack, if he goes down that route of, I guess, free speech, what is the law in Australia in terms of free speech? And something like this, which you could easily argue is hate speech.
Yeah, I mean, look, the one thing is it's a human right, but not all human rights are absolute. All of us who are in the contract of employment, no matter what, qualify our own human rights. We do that every day, and human rights come into conflict every day. And there is this distinction between free speech and hate speech. This is not hate speech, because hate speech is where you incite others towards kind of a violent reaction. This is plainly kind of religious discrimination argument that he's going to play. But it becomes interesting because it becomes then, as an athlete in this situation, can he express himself like this, And, if you look over history, we've had this before in terms of athletes having political views. Some we agree with, some we don't, So, for example, with James McLean, for example, with the poppy argument, there's a political element to that. Is he allowed saying, no, I don't want to wear the poppy at work? And there's other arguments, like, for example, in Australia, one of their most famous sports stars, tennis stars, is a woman called Margaret Court. And she has some views on homosexuality that are not good. And yet one of the major tennis stadiums here is named after her. So, you can go right back even to Muhammad Ali, who said no to the draft on political and religious grounds. But I think when we come back to this, what he said is something that I found morally repugnant, but also his employer said, we don't mind you practicing your religion in private. In fact, your teammates know about that, but we ask you under the code of conduct not to go on social media and do this. And that's what he did.
Where do the players' unions stand on all this?
Yeah, the players' union, their big point is the procedural point. Their argument is, look, you've prejudged him. Whatever about the substance of these arguments, you've already fired him. That's not fair. We have a code of conduct. So that's their big point. It's an awkward one for them as well, because obviously the views that he has are extreme and are not reflective of Australia as a whole, and certainly not reflective of key sponsors for Rugby Australia.
So how do you see this developing then if he does decide to respond over the next 24 hours and he does decide to contest these charges, how do you see it playing out?
I mean, the problem is then it goes very legal. So he'll have a hearing, he has a right to appeal, he may even go to court, and we bring in all these conflicting human rights elements. And as is typical with lawyers, the core point gets forgotten, if you like. The core point is what he said, and what he said is not acceptable to his employers, but it will get wrapped up into procedural things. And remember, they have a Rugby World Cup coming up in October. I mean, he is their key man, really. So, and in an overall context, Rugby Australia is not in a good place. You think the FAI have it bad, but Rugby Australia are in trouble in lots of ways. They don't need this. And that's the context you must see it as a whole.
So Michael Cheika has obviously come out and said that he won't be selecting him, which could be the issue as this develops over the next 48 hours. Is there any way that, as this legal procedure makes its way potentially through the courts over the next few months, that they end up in a situation come October for a Rugby World Cup where they have no choice but to select Israel Folau? Or surely Rugby Australia and Michael Cheika can just say, listen, we get to pick the team, he's not on it?
Yeah, well, first of all, whether Cheika should have said that now is the thing. You know, we haven't even had the code of conduct hearing yet. So whether he should have said that is one thing. But he said it, and that's the way. And I mean, maybe there may be a settlement whereby they don't pick him for the national team, but he continues to play for the Waratahs. Maybe that's it. We don't really know what Israel Folau wants. I mean, the comments that we're getting is that he is now more of a preacher than a player. He literally, and he said that, and there may also be trouble within the Australian rugby national team itself. Some people don't like his views. Some people are, I won't say fully supportive, but I understand where he's coming from. So how is that going to affect Cheika as well? So there's, legal and sporting issues there.
Yeah, and I guess one of the reasons Cheika commented, I'm assuming, is that he was under such huge public pressure to commit to something and to come out and make a statement. What has the public reaction been like in Australia? Is it general outrage, or is there a sense that these are his views, they should be heard?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting... I think the general public have felt that he got a chance, and now he's blown him with the second chance. And they understand his views and his private views, etc. There's also, though, a kind of a legal element to it, where a lot of human rights lawyers are saying, well, he has the right to freedom of expression and this religious argument. But I think the general public are kind of have gone, listen, it's an employment situation which we all face in various ways. It doesn't really matter that he's a sports person. He's an employee, and therefore will face the consequences.
All right, Jack, thanks a lot for taking the call.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Jack Anderson there in Australia, talking us through the Israel Folau situation. We'll be following that on offtheball.com over the next few days.